All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We're so happy that you all are with us today. My name is Neha Sangera, and I'm the Policy Director at the Berkeley Food Institute. I'm pleased to moderate today's Farm to School Program Evaluation webinar. Today's webinar is the third and final webinar in our series on the recent Farm to School Evaluation Progress Report. You can find information about this report and other resources about the program at californiafarmtoschool.eval.org. To provide some background information on this work, California has made the largest investment of any state in the country in farm to school programs, allocating approximately $100 million over the last 3 years since 2020. To understand the impacts of the program, the state of California has funded a multi-year evaluation of the program comprising an interdisciplinary research team. This research team is tasked with providing a comprehensive analysis of the economic, environmental, and social impacts of the Farm to School grant program, including a final report that will be released at the end of 2026. The evaluation team includes researchers and policy experts from UC Agriculture and Natural Resources, UC Berkeley, Food Insight Group, Berkeley Food Institute, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Today's webinar is going to highlight the initial findings from the evaluation team as they relate to the experiences of grantees, diving into their experience with the application process and the implementation of the grant program itself. We will be hearing from both Yasmin Lee from Food Insight Group and Nick Anisich from the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and I'm pleased to invite and introduce both of them. Yasmin Lee is an evaluation specialist at Food Insight Group. For this evaluation project, she sits on the process evaluation, schools and early childhood education, and policy teams. Yasmin is passionate about the power of data to connect those at the grassroots with those who can enact change at the grass tops. She is a researcher, evaluator, project manager, and policy professional. Prior to joining Food Insight Group, Yasmin worked on multiple consultancies for projects related to the North Carolina food system. Yasmin received her master's in public health with a concentration in health policy from UNC Gilling School of Global Public Health. Welcome, Yasmin. Nick Anisich is the Farm to School Program Manager at the California Department of Food and Agriculture. He leads the California Farm to School Network, the California Farm to School Working Group, the California Department of Food and Agriculture Urban Agriculture Grant Program as well. Before joining CDFA, Nick worked as the Community Programs Coordinator at Soilborn Farms in Rancho Cordova, California. He has also worked as a school garden and nutrition coordinator at Sacramento Charter High School in Sacramento, California. So before we dive into the webinar, I did want to just go over a few housekeeping tips. Today's webinar will consist of presentations from both Yasmin and Nick, and then we will move into a moderated discussion where I ask them a few questions. And finally, we'll open up the discussion and receive some audience Q&A. As an audience member, you're welcome and encouraged to put your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to drop in your questions throughout the webinar. You absolutely don't need to wait until the very end for your questions. And with that, I would love to turn it over to Yasmin to begin her presentation.
Thank you so much, Neha. Neha gave an amazing introduction. My name is Yasmin Lee, and I work at Food Insight Group as part of the larger California Farm School Evaluation Team. And I'll be focusing today's presentation on the findings from the process evaluation. And our topic today, what are the experiences for grantees participating in and applying for the Farm School Grant Program in California? To kick us off, I want to share an overview of the grant program as a whole. This is the last of this webinar series, so for anyone that has not joined the previous webinars or who needs a refresher, in this first column here, you can see the overarching design of the grant program. This grant program is intended to be one of the key implementation tools of the state's Farm to School Roadmap, as outlined in the 2022 document, Planting the Seed, Farm to School Roadmap for Success. This first box shows the overarching grant program aims to support projects that cultivate equity, nurture students, build climate resilience, and create scalable and sustainable change. Within those aims, the grant program is designed to directly fund and support projects with consideration for the following funding priorities: students from underserved communities, schools and priority populations, small to mid-sized California producers, veteran socially disadvantaged California producers and our limited resource farm households, California producers using climate smart practices of production systems, and community organizations supporting farm-to-school partnerships. In the next column, you can see the evaluation goals, which are to assess how the program is making progress toward the roadmap goals, identify enabling factors, barriers, and opportunities for future support and investment, and to inform people about what is being learned. But paying attention to 5 impact areas: equity, economic, environmental, education, and enabling factors and barriers. Finally, I will also point out that our evaluation is ongoing as the program continues, and our larger team's focus is on the second and third rounds of funding. And like I mentioned earlier, today's presentation focuses on highlights from the process evaluation team and data from the first 9 months of the 2022 grant cycle and those grantee experiences. So some folks may be wondering, what is a process evaluation? Isn't the team already doing a full evaluation of the grant program? The process evaluation team is a small team within the larger farm-to-school evaluation team, and a process evaluation is a method for examining how a program is implemented and how it's experienced by those within the program. So for the farm-to-school incubator grant program, this means focusing on the RFA, awarding, implementation processes of the grant. Additionally, this means looking at the experiences of grantees in the program and understanding the context for administration and implementation from CDFA staff and regional leads. Specifically, our team focuses on 3 topics: enabling factors and barriers, such as support from CDFA staff through the application and implementation processes of the grant, and structures and systems within CDFA that support the grant. Accessibility and inclusivity, such as ease of accessing and completing application processes in addition to who applies, and alignment with equity goals, understanding the connection between grantee representation of these goals and how the grantees operationalize these goals within their projects. There are 4 main goals from the farm-to-school roadmap, as I mentioned before. And across the work of the evaluation team, the roadmap has been used as a framing for how we evaluate the process, impact, and outcomes of the grant program. For the process evaluation team, we specifically focus on goal 1, cultivate equity when assessing who the grant serves and funds. The roadmap goal is to create opportunities for those who have been historically excluded to improve the health and well-being of the people, places, and communities that define California's food system. The process evaluation looks at the extent to which the grant is meeting that goal as the program is unfolding, rather than waiting until the end to see if it did. This also allows opportunities for training and technical assistance through the CDFA regional leads during the implementation phases of the grant. I want to provide an overview of the 2022 grantees. The farm-to-school grant program's popularity is clear from the large number of applicants and funds requested. The 2022 grant received 264 applications from 50 of California's 58 counties. Additionally, these applicants requested over $58 million in total, more than 2/3 of the amount of funding available for this cycle. All in all, 120 projects ended up being awarded, with a total of $25.5 million in funding. The breakdown across the grant checks can be seen on the screen. K-12 schools received $12.9 million across 53 projects. Partnership organizations received $4.5 million across 11 projects. Early care education organizations, or ECE, received almost $1.2 million across 6 projects. And producers and farmers received $6.8 million across 50 projects. And more than 70% of California's counties received grant funding. The process evaluation team used data from multiple sources for the progress report. These included background data via interviews with organizations familiar with farm-to-school work, and an analysis of the 2021 grantees. We analyzed their exit interviews. We also looked at state-level demographic data. This data was analyzed by looking at percentages of applicant and grantee demographics compared to state-level data to assess representation of priority populations within the grant program. And you'll see this in a few slides. We also had monthly meetings with CDFA staff and regional leads. We conducted quantitative and qualitative analysis of a survey of all 2022 applicants to assess their motivations and opinions of the application process. We had a qualitative analysis of the GLOWs or successes from grantee reports. Also qualitative analysis of the GROWs or challenges, also from grantee quarterly reports. So the GLOWs and GROWs were a section of the reports that grantees had to fill out every quarter. And this was an area where they could dive in deep to talk about the successes and challenges of their respective projects. Most grantee demographic information came from application data and some supplementary information from pre-surveys or the survey that grantees completed at the very start of the grant cycle. The process evaluation team held monthly meetings with CDFA staff to check in on the RFA development, application, awarding, and implementation processes. These conversations included any changes made to the program funding priorities, application review and scoring process, awarding timelines, and ongoing assistance and support from regional leads. Quarterly reports 1, 2, and 3 were analyzed for the first progress report and represent the first 9 months of the grant program. And it's important to note, as Neha mentioned, these findings are still preliminary due to them only capturing the first several months of the grant. The process evaluation team focused on 3 key topics within the progress report: equity goals, key implementation strategies, and grant challenges. These topics reflect a larger framing of the process evaluation. This quarterly evaluation directly thinks about the ways in which CDFA is developing a grant that's accessible to historically excluded groups in the priority population of California, as defined by the RFA in accordance with the state of California's Farm School Roadmap goals. And those goals are awarding an initial 25% of funds to communities that have been historically excluded. I'm going to give a long list of some of the communities that this includes: Black, Latino, Indigenous, and Native American persons, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and other persons of color, members of religious minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer LGBTQ+ persons, persons with disabilities, persons who live in rural areas, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality. This includes the degree to which the grant making process is accessible to these groups in ways it may not have been historically or in other farm to school programs. Also, the degree to which CDFA is responsive to the needs of these groups in finding the grant in order to make it more accessible, and the degree to which CDFA was proactive in its outreach to include historically excluded groups, the degree that CDFA was successful in awarding grants to these communities, and the degree to which CDFA supported grantees throughout the process. Equity goals are on their way to being met. This is one of our larger findings from the progress report. And by equity goals, we mean the populations that are served through the grant, the communities that are reflected in the program's grantees, and the procurement priorities of those purchasing food. Additionally, this means if and how the application process for the grant was accessible to priority populations, and if the support provided throughout the program supports their participation and overall project success. As shown in this table, schools, partner organizations, and early childhood care and education centers are also in line with the desired roadmap goals, indicating that the grant is largely capturing the audience that is seeking to engage. Ensuring access to farm to school programs for low-income and historically underserved communities, as well as supporting small and socially disadvantaged producers, is a critical priority for advancing equity. The Farm to School Grant Program was successful in prioritizing grants to communities and organizations aligned with roadmap priorities on equity, which outlines benchmarks for the state's longer-term farm to school equity goals. Now, this chart shows the percentage of producers statewide, producer applicants, and producer grantees compared across several demographics. Across all of these categories, you can see that the percent of producers that applied and those awarded is larger than the statewide demographic. And so applications from BIPOC producers were proportionally greater than the representation in California, with 30 of 70 producer applicants identifying as BIPOC. And the grantee scoring rubric that CDFA used was largely successful in awarding grants to producers from priority backgrounds. I'll give folks a moment to look at this graph. In the success of the grant program, CDFA's effective outreach and increased staff capacity have led to improved experiences for grantees. There were 3 key implementation strategies that contributed to success: direct communication and outreach, CDFA regional leads, and grantee support. So regarding direct communication and outreach, among the 68% of respondents to an application survey that assessed the application experience that grantees had, We heard that applicants heard about the grant directly from CDFA, which highlights the effective communication efforts that the organization had. Now, regional leads. In the last year, CDFA hired 13 staff, including regional leads, to provide tailored technical assistance, facilitating connections and supporting grantees in navigating the grant process and building strong local partnerships. These regional teams and regional leads act as field analysts, gathering and evaluating data to identify challenges and develop effective solutions that address the unique needs of diverse communities engaged in school food transformation. And lastly, grantee support. Grantees' requests for CDFA assistance decreased over time from quarters 1 through 3, as did the grantees' report the difficulties with CDFA reporting structures, suggesting that the program's support structures and resources have been effective in building grantees' capacity. Although there were several successes in the grant administration, there were also some challenges. These challenges showed up as grant timeline challenges, internal agency capacity, and challenges with the application process. So for grant timeline, the timing of the application due date and the release of grant funds was delayed, which caused challenges particularly for schools and farmers. The application deadline fell during a busy period, and funding delays impacted project planning and planting seasons. You can see one quote from Reducer grantee describing disruptions to their planning process. So I'll pause so you can read that. Internal agency capacity. There were some difficulties mentioned within CDFA with having sufficient external review capacity, lack of an efficient grant portal, and time constraints impacting the ability to support applicants, and formalizing grant funding agreements. Increasing internal capacity could improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the grant administration process. And lastly, the application process. There were a few challenges mentioned about the application process, including language barriers, overcomplication of the application itself, and needs for additional support. You can see one quote from a K-12 grantee that there was a lack of internal capacity at their organization to complete the application. And I'll pause so you can read that. So next steps for the process evaluation. This portion concludes the presentation of my small team's work and findings for the progress report. However, I wanted to share some next steps for our team's work, just generally speaking. As mentioned earlier, the 2022 grant cycle is still ongoing, and our analysis will also continue. And the 2024 cohort was recently announced and will be starting early next year. The process evaluation team will begin analyzing application data and continue looking at grantee quarterly reports. And lastly, we anticipate having deeper engagement and conversations with CDFA staff and regional leads. I will now pass it over to Nick.
Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you for taking this on. That's what I'll say. It's been a huge lift, and we don't make it easy on the evaluation team because this is a giant program that is changing quickly and often. And so it's hard to have changes cohort to cohort, year to year, and to make sure that all those things are tracked and they don't mess up all the things we're trying to evaluate. So I'm just so grateful for the evaluation team. And then I am also grateful, I was just scrolling through the participant list. There are so many people here that are grantees or past grantees or part of our Farm to School network or helped write the original Farm to School network plans from CAF. So many great partners here, and it's very fun to even just see your names. So thanks, y'all. Thank you. So moving ahead to, we heard just kind of what the annual report had on the process evaluation. I think, again, we're so lucky to have the evaluation team to be able to do additional data and research collection on what this process was like for grantees, and also to give us guidance on how we can improve the grant application process going forward. It's always really challenging, of course, being at the state and trying to translate what people need on the ground into state agency processes. And I think this evaluation, it's not just helping our initiative in Farm to School, but also we're able to share this report with other divisions and other pieces of our agency. So I know when it came out, our Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation, our OFE program, Tawny emailed me immediately and was like, oh my gosh, thank you guys for highlighting these challenges that we're facing. So I just want to showcase that this really is having a ripple effect across our agency, and we're really grateful for it. Okay, so what I'm planning to do here is just to look at, all right, so we got all this feedback. So then what happened? What do we do next? We just announced this next cohort. So the annual report focuses on what I call cohort 2, which is the 2022 data that we were looking at. We just announced the 2024 group, which I call cohort 3. So here's kind of how we took that feedback and shaped it into this next cohort. So the first thing that happened is that CDFA got a new grants platform. So in the past, we used this platform called WiseHive, and it was okay. We all read the feedback. It's still complex and technical and a competitive grant application that's trying to reach really specific audiences and support specific populations and types of farmers. So, we know that the grant is going to be hard, but at least the application can, like the software itself, can be simple. So the new grant platform that CDFA switched to is called Amplifund. And Amplifund was adopted as an agency-wide solution. And I think with that, we tried our best to simplify it, and I don't necessarily think that happened in cohort 3. So I'm very interested to see what the feedback is from this new cohort. But that was one of the changes, is that we had this new grants platform to deal with. So that was thing 1. Thing 2 is that in the design of our program, one of the things that we got feedback on and saw the data from in cohort 2 is that the tribal applicants that submitted applications didn't necessarily receive funding at the same rates as other socially disadvantaged communities. And so what we wanted to do is see what regulations and flexibilities we had at CDFA to ensure that tribal applicants could receive funding. So we were able to use a tribal set-aside and set aside up to 10% of all funds for California tribes. And it was not the first program at CDFA to do that. Our urban agriculture grant program had a set-aside, as well as I think one other, our specialty crop block grant has set aside for socially disadvantaged communities. So we knew it was possible. So we created this set aside in hopes to open conversations with more California tribes about applying, and to make sure that they could see themselves in the application and not square peg, round hole, just try to make it work, because we know how challenging that is. The third big change is that we adjusted track 2, which in the 2022 cohort was the California Farm to School Partnerships track. And we shifted it to be called the Technical Assistance track, and to try to allow our expertise in the nonprofit partners we have in the state, to allow them to operate from that expertise and not try to recruit the highest need partners in the state that are then getting 25 different requests for partnership. That's a really hard position to put our school districts in, is to have to try to sort through all these different partners they've been working with. And also, we acknowledge that a huge part of the partnership track was about building capacity at these community-based organizations. And so instead of forcing a partnership, let's just allow people to provide technical assistance based on what they're great at. So we created these buckets, one for school food, one for education, and one for small farmers. So that was a big pivot in track 2. In track 4, we then combined, which track 4 is our farm to school producer track. We also, in this new cohort, added food hubs to that. The thinking there was that the food hubs aren't really a farm to school partnership. A food hub is more in alignment with these producer organizations. They're producer and school serving. They can pull a lot of similar data that the producers would have to include in their applications. So this year in track 4, we added in the food hubs and we increased the award amount. So this is something I'm very interested to see what the change in impact is year to year. I believe in cohort 2, Yasmin, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, I want to say that the maximum award amount was $200,000 for track 4 in 2022. And we increased it this year to 500,000. So big. And then last, hired regional staff. This was a huge one. Yasmin covered this too. They came in about, I don't know, the cohort two had already started, so they kind of jumped in midstream. But for this round of the applications, they were there to do that direct outreach. So, we had the quote from the school nutrition director who said, I'm a one person show. I don't have capacity to get all this fancy data and pull it into the app and do this work. So at least what we could provide is a little bit of help and support. We couldn't write the application for folks on our team because that's a huge conflict of interest to have our staff writing apps. But they could help recruit and be the main point of contact for Q&A and problem solving and that sort of thing. So that was the biggest shift, I think, is having the regional staff there from the start to help promote and recruit folks to apply. So those are the big 5 changes. And then I just have some cohort 3 application data to show. I don't know why I didn't pull the totals here, but it was a lot of money requests. We had in total 499 applications this year. And I'll pull the total as we go. But for track 1, there were 131 applications submitted and 33 million. That's the K through 12 procurement and education track. So you can see a pretty competitive track, but a lot of those applicants were selected for funding to make sure the K-12 partners have funding and can sustain their farm to school programs. Track 2, which became the technical assistance track, had 39 applications and 12 million requested, and there were only 10 selected. So you can see that that is a huge not attrition rate, but just declined rate. And I'll get into it more as we go, but it's hard to say no to this many organizations that have such great history doing great work in California. And so that was a really challenging thing that happened this year. And again, interested to hear the process feedback from folks as that dives in. Track 3 was farm to ECE. And in the 2022 year, there were 6 projects for $1 million. And this year there were 100 applications. So the ECE world has totally blown up and gotten popular, and the word was spread, but we still had a small amount allocated for that track. So we ended up funding 17 projects with 3.2 million. And then track 4, which was our producer and food hub track, the applications, there were 229 requesting $66 million in funding. Ultimately, we only had enough dollars to fund 60 projects at 18 million total. So when we looked at this as a team, our big thinking was, should we have kept those track 4 awards as big as we made them this year? Thinking through, even if we only increased them by 100 grand year over year, we would have probably been able to fund 20 more projects in track 4 with the same amount of funds. So that total award amount is a real challenge, and trying to figure out, because for farms that are doing farm to school can scale, and we want to support that scale and make it sustainable and long lasting. In the roadmap, it says create scalable and sustainable impact. This was our last year of having grant funds. I think it would have been a really tough spot to give a bunch of small grant awards out and just hope that those can sustain long term versus funding a greenhouse and a wash station and a new truck where we know that those things can sustain. So that's the big data there on this track. And do I have one more thing on there? I think I have the data of who applied, right? And then here's the last bit of me reading bullet points. Is there were 195 awardees. Here's where I put the totals. 195 awardees, $52.8 million funded. We want to target high need schools and partners. There were 173 of those 195 projects support Title I schools. That's $48 million of the $52 million going to Title I school projects. We had the set aside for tribal projects. There were 5 this year compared to, I think, 1 in the prior year. We funded 8 food hubs directly, which is very exciting for us. 60 out of 60 awardees in track 4 utilize climate smart ag practices, and 57 out of 60 producers in track 4 or projects in track 4 represent socially disadvantaged producers. So we were we know the application is hard. We know the scorecard is sometimes confusing. We know that we're asking for a lot out of people. But in order to get these impact areas that we're tracking them from the start to the finish and ensuring that these dollars are getting to these communities, there is a hurdle to get through in the application to ensure the accountability to our goals. So that's the big stuff I think from our state agency side. Again, we're so grateful for everyone. The farm to school community in California is gigantic and it grows every day. And we wish we could fund every single project that comes through the door. And to have this data to improve our process and try to speed things up and try to make it more effective, we're just really grateful for that. So that's my presentation and excited for questions and to talk things through.
Thank you so much, Nick, and Yasmin, both for providing so much great information, including a thorough recap of what we've published in the evaluation report, but also Nick for just providing the perspective from the state agency side. So I do have a few questions I'd like to ask both of you, but I also wanted to remind the audience, you're welcome to put your questions in the chat. I see a few questions coming in, and I might pepper those in with the questions that I've already prepared. I might just start with an audience question because it kind of has to do with the tracks that Nick was speaking to earlier. So the question is, are the 4 tracks of the grant only relevant to farm to school grant programs in California? So I think a little bit of maybe background and context on how these tracks were developed and if this model and structure is used in other programs as well would be helpful.
Yes, and I accidentally said to Abby's note earlier, or Q&A, I accidentally answered it, but thank you, Abby, for putting in the right info. And then for this question, the 4 tracks are specific to California's Farm to School Incubator Grant Program. And the short version is we had $8 million the first year of the grant, and it was during COVID. And so we did track 1 and track 2. So we had individual schools could apply, and we had partnerships. Then when we had 30 million bucks, we're like, oh my God, we need to fund farms and food hubs too. So then we added in the producer track, and we also added in the ECE community because we're like 30 mil, that could get spread out. And then we got $60 million and we just added more money to those existing buckets. So those 4 buckets will probably all stay in there in future funding, but we'll see how much funding will dictate which tracks are open. I think there's demand across the board for that systems approach. And I think the data tells us that the systems approach is what's needed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nick. And thanks for whoever asked that question. The next question also related to tracks, so I will pose that. What was the process to decide how much funding was awarded to each track? If you don't mind recapping that.
That is a great question. So what we typically, I think we had an FAQ on our webpage. I wish I had that on hand. It feels like it was years ago now when all this happened. What we do is we say, all right, we have 60 million. We knew that half, based on a requirement from the legislature, we knew that at least half the dollars had to go to Title I schools. The only way to do that was to ensure that half the dollars went to track 1, our K through 12, our K through 12 procurement and education track. So we knew, all right, out of the 60 mil, 30 mil's got to go there to hit that requirement. After that, we think that we need to fund producers and food hubs to scale what they are doing with the next priority area. So I think we ended up pulling, like, out of what was left, we took 15 mil into that track was our prediction. And then 30 and 15 is 45. So then we kind of split the rest between technical assistance and early care and education. We don't know a ton about early care and education and how sustainable those grant projects are going to be. So we kind of have seen that K-12 model with the National School Lunch Program and increased participation in revenue that we feel like those track 1 projects can sustain, and those track 4 projects we're hopeful can sustain. So the reason why those 2 get prioritized is because that's capacity at the people who do the thing every single day. So that was that. And then what we did is we saw how many apps actually came in and how much money was requested. So with so much requests in track 4, we knew we had to increase the number of projects funded there. So that's why that one ended up at 18 million for this most recent cohort. So it really is kind of like see where the demand is, see what the data tells us is going to be most viable, see what the legislature requires, and then try to check all those different boxes.
Great. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
My next question is to Yasmin. So, Yasmin, was there anything surprising or unexpected that you and your team learned from collecting and reviewing data as it related to the grantee experience?
Yeah, I'll name a few things. So I mentioned the quarterly reports the grantees fill out. So every quarter, there's a set amount of questions, depending on which quarter it is, that they're kind of filling out to kind of let us know about their progress. This is both for CDFA's purposes and for the evaluation team. I mentioned that the process evaluation team kind of did a deep dive on the glows and grows, or the successes and challenges that each grantee was facing every quarter. So we looked at every single glow and grow reported across the 3 quarters for all 120, cohort 2 grantees. And what was really pleasantly surprising is the extent that people really gave us a deep dive in the glow section, are talking about their highlights of their projects. It was just, people are really going into like anecdotals, they're sharing quotes that they're hearing from families, from students. So it was really, it was a long process to go through them, but it was so worthwhile to get the context of not just on paper what their projects are, what they applied to do, but the actual impact and the connections that are being made. So every quarter was the exact same. It was like tons of bullets of all the amazing things that were happening, or a lot of paragraphs. We even got links to Instagram stories or newsletters that we could go look at. So they really wanted to give a really good representation of like how well their grant program is doing. Additionally, so I did mention some of the challenges related to the timing for schools and for farms along like the start of the school year versus when our optimal times for growing. It was actually really interesting to see some of the pivots that grantees were able to make to be proactive with updates to the grant funding timeline. So although obviously that can create difficulties when we know the school timeline goes from August to June, and that we know that peak growing time for a lot of people is like, spring, fall, for example. But there was a lot of just like flexibility, I think, in both the producer side and the school side in terms of like, what do we actually want in our agreement? What did we go into the application saying we would do together? And what pivots can we actually make to make this feasible? So although there were challenges, it was, really nice to be able to see people, find their way to be successful. So, and like I said, we only reviewed up until quarter 3. So I imagine when our process evaluation team is able to go through quarters 4 through the rest of the grant cycle, we'll be able to see that those pivots really paid off for people. And we also saw a lot of people name regional leads specifically. There was a section of every quarterly report where people could kind of just add any other information that we didn't ask about. And almost every grantee either said something generally for CDFA and how awesome the agency is, or they would name the specific regional leads that are, assigned to their territory. So it got to the point where we saw so many that we actually created a qualitative code that we just called CDFA Praise, just to be able to pull those apart and see those. And we thought it was kind of meaningful to be able to pull those separately. Just to see that, like, Nick was mentioning, the hiring of these leads is really impactful for grantees. And I imagine that we would see that continuing on for the 2022 cycle and going into 2024, since this new cohort grantees will be able to start their grant cycle with the regional leads. So those are just a few things, but it's the amazing things that you're able to see when you do a little bit of qualitative analysis.
Yeah, that's great to hear that there was such a strong theme emerging from the data related to praise for the regional leads. I'm sure that's really informative for Nick and his staff as well. So the next question is from our audience. I'll ask it to Nick. What advice do each of you have for current grantees based on your learnings from cohort 2? Maybe I'll have Nick start, and if Yasmin has anything she'd like to add as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just think ask for what you need. That's the biggest thing. And spend your dollars down quick. Now, that part is optional. But asking for what you need is the biggest thing. And again, like the quote that was in the deck is so helpful because it talks about the challenges with the delay in the project start dates. It just took us a long time to set up all the agreements. But the delay in the project start dates and how, okay, well, I didn't get my start date until later, so I missed that window. And then I require advance payment. So then like that was an additional layer where that was going to take, probably at least another 45 days or so. Just all of that stuff, you have to ask for what you need and then game around it. And I also just working with the state, I was telling this, I think, to my father-in-law yesterday. I'm like, we used to say that the projects would start on X date, and now we say summer. Like, we can't even give you an exact date. Oftentimes, our contract unit doesn't want to give an exact date. So I really think like anything that's absolutely time urgent and you're really bumping up against it, make sure you're in proactive communication with our team about those things compared to things that are like, all right, well, it's going to float sometime in this quarter and that's when we'll be able to jump start on it. I think those are the biggest challenges and hurdles, and that's where the regional leads can really come into because they can be your advocate and translator for things that you need.
I'll just add a little bit in terms of, I think a lot of the kind of challenges we saw from grantees in those quarterly reports were like pretty consistent, challenges. So I think like Nick was saying, like really doubling down and asking for help. And like even as an external evaluator, I can say that I think CDFA is very motivated to make sure the grantees and their projects succeed. Like just from being in conversation with the agency and regional leads, that's what everybody wants at the end of the day. And then because I think there were a lot of, consistent barriers or hurdles people faced, definitely bring those up with, your regional leads, because I feel like even if, it doesn't feel that important of a topic or a question for you, it probably is relevant for somebody else. And like these conversations are building this knowledge base. So any, thing that comes up in the track or the cohort 2, 2022 grantees can easily come up in this most recent. So I'd say keep those dialogues going because I think all the information and conversations that are flowing are really valuable.
Great. That was a really good question from the audience member. So thank you for asking that. The next question, also from the audience, based on what you've learned from all of these projects over the past few years, is the evaluation team producing program guidelines for best practices, program models that we can use to implement farm to school going forward?
I'll say that in the larger report, and we can drop a link for folks that don't have it, we do have a section like our key takeaways. So our evaluation obviously is focused within the constraints of the farm to school grant program, but we also keep in mind the larger California landscape of farm to school. So I will say that is something we're thinking about, maybe not as explicitly as best practices at this stage, since we've just started the preliminary kind of analysis of cohort 2. But like Neha mentioned, I'm also on the policy team. So this is something that we're having conversations about, thinking about, here's what we're seeing from the evaluation findings, now what? So I'll say yes, and that's something that those conversations will be happening more frequently once we have more information, because we really want to make sure any kind of recommendation of any kind is substantiated. So I think going past the preliminary findings is when our team will really have that kind of lens to looking at things like that.
And can I just share one piece on that too? Is when we started in our farm to school work in California, it was like, we're going to have so many awesome templates. This is going to be so easy. We're going to talk to the people doing it. We're going to find out what they do that works. We're going to create a template and we'll use that. It'll be great. And then you start actually trying to do that. And everyone's like, oh, well, my school board doesn't work that way. Oh, well, my school doesn't, oh, the farmers would never do that in this part of the state. And so it's just like, it's going to be taking those things and of course, customizing it for your audience and your community. In California's just the growing season is so different than so many other places in the nation. So in some ways that makes it great and easy because we have so much food. And then in other ways, it's like, there's not 4 food. We just fund all 4 of them equally. Everything will be, the whole state is covered, right? So there's just all these different challenges that come with it too. So balancing out whatever comes from the eval team that's backed and proven and repeatable with, your real situation and what your farmers and people need. We have a mission statement. It's in the roadmap. So ask people for what they need and try to give it to them. And it's just that over and over.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, that's a really helpful perspective to have, that the templates and best practices can only take us so far because of the diverse nature of all of the grantees and applicants. The next question, I will kick it back to you, Nick. What are you excited to see in this next round of grantees and just the future of the Farm to School program and the grant program?
It's a great question. I think it's so right now my whole focus is like, how do I fill out my team? I have like 4 open spots. So everyone who's on this call, please, follow me on LinkedIn and look for these open positions as they get posted. So, like, what's most exciting to me, because I'm now a degree of separation away from the grant projects. So it's like my regional staff are dealing with them. I only get the ones that like, hey, is this allowed or not allowed? Can you send this up the chain? So that's like where I'm at now. So what I get most excited about is for my regional staff to see the relationships growing between the regional staff and these grantees and non-grantee partners in their regions. It's really, really powerful when they're invited to a million different things on one day to see how embedded they are in these communities and how these projects are starting to stitch together. I think one thing that's going to come out in this next cohort is like the LA region had so many applications, not just on the school side, but across other tracks too. And I really think that's because LA Unified has really been beating the drum of farm to school and really in the media about what they're doing and listening to students and changing their menus and putting their dollars, they're walking the walk, talking the talk. And I think that's having a ripple effect. So I'm really excited to see people like to start reaping what we've sown of all of this great work, the relationships, now connecting to the funding, now connecting to the storytelling, and then tacking on the evaluation and proven data and impact. I just think a lot of those flowers are starting to come in, and I'm excited to celebrate all of that.
Great. Thank you, Nick. The next question is for Yasmin, a bit of a two-parter. So what topics or data points in the process evaluation team, or I'm sorry, what topics or data points will the process evaluation team be focused on in the next round? And then also, what are you looking forward to seeing come through in the next round as a part of the process evaluation team?
Yeah, so from my presentation, you might be able to see that our team looks at all the tracks, which is a little bit unique in terms of the farm school evaluation team. We have several small teams, but a lot of them are more track specific. And we also talked about how the evaluation team, our focus is on the 2022 grantees and 2024. This will be the first time that any of the teams will be able to look at data between the two. So just overall, we're really excited to be able to do that. Not just because, oh my gosh, we have new grantees, new stories, like I mentioned, we love deep diving into the stories, but the size of the cohort is much larger. The funding is larger. So there's a lot of excitement of comparing some of the bigger numbers we talked about some of the communities that are served or communities that were represented. We're really excited to be able to continue to look at that for the 2022 cycle, but compare it to 2024. Nick kind of gave us a teaser of like some of those demographics, but our team is really excited to do a deep dive for all of the tracks of who's represented and who is served. We also want to have some deeper conversations, like I mentioned, with CDFA and regional leads. We have our monthly calls, but I think it'd be really impactful and informative to have kind of that side of the grant implementation process and specifically the technical assistance and support side. We've been able to get that from our more informal conversations, and obviously we've gotten that from seeing the grantee perspective in their quarterly reports, but we really want to see the full picture. So we have some plans to do some deeper analysis with regional leads and Nick himself in a more formal setting to paint a clear picture of, like he was saying in his presentation, some of the changes that were made between cohort 2 and cohort 3 for the application process. But as a cohort 3 starts, we actually really want to know too what else is happening in terms of the technical support. They will be supporting 2 different grant cycles on top of each other for a little bit. So we want to know about, that process and how the agency is doing with that. So all to say, everything that we talked about in the presentation, we'll continue to do a deep dive of, but really focus on what are the changes, what are the comparisons, and also bringing it back to comparing it to the state level. How equitable is this program? Is it representative of the people that it's serving and what the California population looks like?
Great. Thank you so much. We have two questions that have come in through the chat and only a few minutes left. So I'm going to ask them and then we'll wrap it up. So the first question is the evaluation team looking at common challenges across school districts and farms to help those on the ground to identify common strategies for success and overcoming common challenges with program implementation?
Yeah, so within the evaluation team, I mentioned there are some small teams that are more track specific. So we have the schools and ECE team, which focuses on tracks 1 and 3. We also have the environmental team that focuses on track 4. And we have a case studies team that kind of looks at information and data across all the tracks to really kind of understand the larger farm to school supply chain. So just to say yes, we do have some kind of cross collaboration happening. And, I talked about the future of the process evaluation, but for folks that weren't able to participate in the earlier webinars, those teams have plans to collaborate further to be able to kind of give that holistic picture like I was talking about, because there are similar challenges. We have heard from the schools and ECE presenters what the challenges are, and same for the farmer producer side. So we imagine the future of analysis for the evaluation team to kind of give the audience and the greater farm to school kind of community insights into those two. So I don't want to speak for them. I'll just say that yes, that's definitely happening. And even if you don't see it as clearly defined in the report, that's kind of like our next stage of kind of dissemination that we're planning on.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yasmin. The next question is related to farm to institution programs broadly, so I'll ask it to Nick. Is CDFA and or other state markets like prisons, hospitals, other government agencies, are they looking at this program as a model to replicate in other farm to institution programs?
Yes, definitely. And this is a great question. Thank you so much for asking it because this is one of the things that's in our farm to school roadmap too, is that our regional staff are they have these great networks of producers and buyers and problem solvers and supply chain partners. And that doesn't only work for schools, right? That can work for hospitals and correctional facilities and all different types of institutions. Higher education is a big focus too. So our team does, if it's a regional working group, then one of our regionals participates in that conversation around farm to institution. And if it is a larger statewide movement, then I'm normally the one who participates in it for now. So there's a UC Farm to Corrections working group that I'm part of to try to leverage our staff. There's a Beef to Institution group that I'm part of that looks at higher ed and K-12. I think it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, there was a farm to hospital piece of legislation where if passed, it would have sat in our Office of Farm to Fork to coordinate. So lots of other coordination and trying to layer those resources so that our regional staff can be maximized. And then we also have our Farm to Community Food Hub grant program, which the public comment period for that is going to start early next week. The RFP is going to be published. So for public comment, so that program also is focused on food hubs and aggregators that serve institutions.
Oh, forgot to mute myself there. Thank you so much, Nick, for answering that question. We're in the final minute. We have one more question, so I'm going to speed read it and hopefully we can speed answer it. But it is a big question. One of the challenges you mentioned was the award timeline. I'm curious if there's any way the legislature could structure future funding that would make it easier to get out the door.
It's actually not the structure of the funding that makes it hard to get it out the door. It is just the internal hurdles of trying to review 500 applications and then prepare 200 award packages and then go through a 90-day contract period. So that's really it. It's like with the scale of the application, it's just things take longer to review and audit and double check and get clarification and all of those sorts of things. So really it's just an internal challenge at CDFA. for us to utilize our capacity best and administrative capacity best to get these agreements done. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for answering that.
Mhm.
We are at time, so I just wanted to take a moment to thank both of our panelists, Yasmin and Nick, and obviously our audience members for asking some really incredible questions. If you want to find more information about the report or other informational resources, you can go to californiafarmtoschooloval.org. There's also a great story map that's been produced that I'd like to promote. And then I'll lastly just share that we're going to be uploading recordings of this webinar and the previous two webinars in this series onto the California Farm to School Evaluation program website. So you can definitely look out for that to be uploaded in the near future. So thank you so much. With that, I will wish you all a happy weekend. See you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.